Hello and welcome to the Calmcast, a time to feel calm and think clearly. I'm Claire Downham, the Queen of Calm, a transformational life coach. I was a burnt out head teacher who finally made the journey to calm after years of trying, and I want to prevent you from having to do the same. The Calmcast is a series of short explorations, gently guiding you back to your natural state, which is calm and clarity. Just listen like you would listen to music, with an open mind and curiosity. There's nothing else to do. Now let's relax into today's episode. So today, how to stop getting wound up. And this kind of metaphor came to mind because obviously at the moment we're all trying to save a bit of money on the old heating bills, aren't we? Heating our hot water and heating our homes and things like that, because the price of household fuel in the UK has reached a really quite ridiculous price. And I think my fiance had been looking at Martin Lewis's money tips, and he'd suggested turning down the temperature of the water in the boiler. And we had this huge realization, because actually that was actually perfect for us, because our shower runs, it's a shower that is attached. We have good water pressure here, so we don't need an electric shower. It attaches straight to the water pipe over the bath. And what we tend to do is put the hot on full, and then we have to put the cold tap. You have to fiddle around with it a little bit to get to the point where you actually have a shower that's a reasonable temperature. It does tend to go hot and cold a bit sometimes, and it's a bit of a faff trying to get it to the right temperature. But we realise that actually we're putting all this hot water in, and then we're putting quite a lot of cold water in. So we're kind of heating the water up to cool it down. And so we turned down the temperature of the water in the boiler, and now we don't really need to put cold water in. We can get a shower just by switching the hot tap on, and it's a really nice shower. And it's obviously it's more economical to be not turning the hot water up and then adding cold water to it, heating the water up and then cooling it down. But it's it's also a lot less fiddly. Get a shower much quicker and easier without running quite a lot of water while you fiddle around with a cold tap to make it the right temperature. And when this happened, I had this real realization that what a wonderful metaphor that is for how we work as human beings, and how we try to address when we get hot under the collar, shall we say, or wound up is another way to put it, or angry or frustrated, or any of those feelings that we generally find unpleasant. Because when we're living in the outside in paradigm, when we believe the world works outside in, we can get really wound up by things in the world out there, and then find ways to calm ourselves down, whether that's deep breathing or square breathing or meditation or whatever else people do, or drinking wine and eating chocolate or whatever else seems to make sense to help us to feel, to not feel wound up anymore. So we are getting wound up to then cool down. And in the outside in paradigm, there's nothing else that makes sense really, because if we believe that our feelings are coming from the outside world, then we have no choice but to be a victim really of the outside world, believing that we feel terrible and wound up because the outside world's making us feel that way. And so then we have to do some kind of self-moderation or tool or technique to try and bring ourselves back down again. And how similar that is to us, to us heating up our water to a ridiculously too hot temperature and then putting cold in to cool it back down again, so it's actually tolerable. And that word tolerable is really useful, isn't it? Because it is our inability to tolerate those unpleasant feelings that mean and the misunderstanding that they're coming from outside of us, that means that we have to act in the outside world. So we might shout at our other half. That might be a way to feel like we're not going to be wound up anymore. If you let it all hang loose and and shout at our loved ones, that that can seem like a way, can't it? So what's the alternative? Of course, I'm going to provide one. I'm not going to provide a how to stop getting wound up. But once you understand what I'm saying, you generally start to choose not to get wound up, really. And don't think that I don't get wound up, because I do, but thankfully for a shorter time and with less intensity than I used to do. So when we start to realize that the wound up feeling is only one thing, that only comes from one place, that comes from our state of mind, our thought in the moment, our perspective on this thing that is happening, this person's behavior or this situation in the world, then, well, first of all, we take better care of ourselves, I would say. So when we feel wound up, there's a realization that that's a signal from our system to let us know that we've got wound up thinking. And then, sometimes it might make sense to take a breath, create a pause, whatever makes sense to us. But it's not the doing. I'm not sharing the how, because the how comes from your understanding of where your feelings are coming from. And I've got some situations in my life where I kind of bob back and forth between totally seeing that it's me and totally feeling like they just need to stop doing that and I'll be okay. As I often share in these sessions, we have some difficult relationships in our life. Well, one really difficult relationship in our life, Bruce and I. And I bounce between wanting her to be different and realizing it's about taking care of me. And that's perfectly normal and human. But when we realize that, like, I know now, I still kind of go up them sometimes, but I do know that there are some trains of thought that are not going to be helpful. They create an unpleasant, wound up feeling. They don't feel good. The ranting is horrible. They don't provide me with any clarity to try and solve anything, but they do create quite an unpleasant feeling. And as I've said lots of times before, this is not about letting people get away with it kind of thing. It's still, still from the quiet, calm place, you can say, hey, that what you did, that's not okay. Can we have a conversation about doing that differently from now on, please? But knowing, of course, that if they're not open to that, you're still okay. Your well-being isn't dependent on somebody else's behavior or some circumstance being a particular way in your life. So when you realize in the moment that that wound up feeling isn't coming from the outside world, it's coming from you, you just act in a very different way. You don't get as wound up because you realize that there's a train of thought you're on you don't have to stay on. So you don't have to get hot and then try and cool yourself down with tools and techniques. You might take a breath, you might create a pause, but it's not on the same level of the world out there is making me feel bad and I feel terrible every day, so I'm going to have to install this endless run of tools and techniques in order to just stabilize myself and make myself feel okay. Because when you realize it's not coming from out there, more and more there seems to be a choice point. Go on this train of thought or not. And I often think, like, I love to shove a couple of metaphors into this session, but I think it's like, when you watch a I feel like it's like an old cowboy film or something where the railway tracks got blown away and the train is heading towards the railway that's going to go off into some great big crevice somewhere. But we can get off the train before that. We don't have to go headlong into that wound up pit of despair. We can get off the train. That is always available to us. That facility, I suppose, to get off the train. That's when you see that you're on a train and that there are stations where you can get off. If you think it's the train and the doors are all locked and the horrible train is taking you on this awful journey into a cliff, into a pit of despair and wound upness, then you're not going to know there's an option to get off the train. But once you realise it's your train of thought, then you just make different decisions about what to do. So I think that's a really helpful thing to see at this time of year, because I think a lot of people are struggling, to be honest, and understandably. And just seeing that it isn't your family and, the present you got that you didn't want and anything else, or, the food cooking or shopping or whatever else that's creating your experience. It's you're thinking about those things is really helpful when we're in a quite intense period of the year, aren't we, where we might have to hang around with people who are not our favourite people. Anybody doing that? I'm sure plenty of people are. So yeah, I hope you find that really useful. We don't need to get heated up and then cool ourselves down. We can start to make a choice not to get heated up in the first place. And that is a nicer way to live life, to be fair. So I hope you found that helpful. Lots of love.
Thank you so much for listening. There's nothing to do now but bring some awareness to how this is working out in your life. Listen regularly to experience longer and longer periods of calm. This has been the Calmcast with Claire Downham, Queen of Calm. Take care and keep listening.